For some Americans, Canada can be a top contender when they start thinking about where to live abroad. I mean, this shouldn't be surprising. Proximity, shared language, and a somewhat similar way of life can make the country very appealing. And let's be real, there's almost a running joke about Americans running to Canada depending on what's going on politically in the US. In 2019, Mahlena-Rae Johnson and her family made a move to Toronto after a long time feeling that they just wanted a life beyond the US. Easy, right? Not necessarily. Mahlena-Rae describes the almost 2-year gap between their decision to move and the actual possibility of going. They tried several times before they found an application route that made it possible. In this episode, we talk a lot about the differences between the United States and Canada. She explains how her upbringing in St. Thomas, where her mother gained a position as a professor, influenced her interest in travel early on, as well as discusses her reasons for pivoting from working in media to full-scale entrepreneurship. If I had to sum this episode up, it would be knowing the differences between perception and reality. Mahlena-Rae and I spend a good amount of time discussing what should seem completely straightforward on paper, but in actuality, really isn't. Welcome to the Global Chatter.
Well, I haven't lived abroad until now. I was born in Arkansas, and then when I was 4, my mother and I moved to St. Thomas because that's where her family was. So I lived in St. Thomas from 4 to 17, and at 5 was when I got my first passport. So let's
Nice.
see. It was 1986. So I would have been 4 that summer. Yes, I got my first passport then because we were going on a cruise, and one of the stops was Caracas, Venezuela. So that's when we had to use it. And so I've had a passport since then, and I've encouraged everyone in my family to have one um, as a form of ID because
Of course.
you don't get a license until you're a minimum 16. And
Yeah.
until then, unless you have a school ID,
Right.
there's nothing showing who you are. So I've also traveled internationally. In addition to multiple cruises, I went on trips to Europe with my high school. So I went to Spain first, then Italy and Greece, then Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam. I don't know of any other big countries before then, mostly throughout the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
And we did an exchange with Newfoundland when I was in 8th grade.
Nice. So you got, I mean, as a teenager, that's kind of, I mean, in school, that's kind of major. You hit some places. I mean, I know it's a school trip and I've been to most of those places, but to do that, like, essentially under 18, that's pretty big.
Well, yes, it was exciting, and it was something that I thought more people would want to do. But initially, the trips were kind of small, and I was like, "Why isn't
Really?
everybody going?" It wasn't a sense. I went to a school where there were enough people there with money that could have gone. There are also people there with not that much money, but
Yeah.
percentage wise, there are more people who could have opted into those first trips.
Wow.
We got enough people as the person who came to our school who introduced the concept of EF tours to us uh, was there. So as she continued to move throughout the school, more people joined. But yes, I mean, it for me it wasn't strange traveling to places. I was always excited to go, and other
Yeah.
people were like, "Yeah, I guess I'll just chill here and surf." All right.
Okay. But so here's, and I'm doing the math in my head. So I'm thinking this might be mid or late 90s, early 2000s.
Yes. So I was the first trip, the Newfoundland trip was when I was in 8th grade. So
Mhm.
that was in 1994. That was that spring break. And then the next trip was 1995. So it was in the mid to late 90s.
And then the reason I bring that up is that because right now, especially with social media, we see this big like travel movement, however you want to dissect it, right? Young people traveling, people of color traveling, families traveling, LGBT travel. Like we see that solo women travel,
Mhm.
but we did. I mean, because I'm roughly in the same age bracket. Let's just be honest. Like if you didn't know anyone who traveled, and I grew up abroad, like so for me it was natural. But if you didn't grow up around anyone who traveled, why would you get excited about it? So I think that is pretty interesting that you like you were someone who's like I want to go places.
Well, yes, I mean,
Yeah.
I figured it's a place, let's go do
Let's
it because it
right.
'cause why not? Like, it's an opportunity, and if you can afford it, let's have a new opportunity. I also at the time didn't like being on St. Thomas, not because there was anything particularly that terrible about it, but
Mm,
it's an island in the Caribbean and it's it you it's only 13 miles by 1 mile. So
yeah.
there's only so much to do and I had done a lot of those things and I grew up watching uh TV since before I was born and I would watch whatever, including Nickelodeon, but all these
Yeah.
other shows, and I'm like, "Okay, there's a place, let's go. Why not?" And I grew up watching the Disney Channel too, which at the
Of
time
course.
was essentially a hotel channel that occasionally played movies and shows, but really was like, "Come to Disneyland,
Come to
come to Disney World. Why
No,
aren't
that is
you
true.
here?
That is true.
Don't you see the picture? Didn't you see
The-
Full House go?"
yeah, right,
So
exactly.
so yeah, I'm like, "Let's go." Like, it never occurred to me that as I have learned now, that most people don't leave where they're born, and
Mhm.
that was crazy to me meeting people when I went to college at, Loyola Marymount University in Los
Mhm.
Angeles, that there were people who had never left the state. And again, it was not just a matter of they didn't have the money or resources to, they just didn't.
So there are like two things you said that really stuck out to me. Number one, the very fact that growing up in St. Thomas, I think for people who don't live there, they may think of it as a vacation spot, but there's something that you
Mhm.
said. It's like it's an island. There's only so much you can do on an right because you've only got so much land. And so if you grow up somewhere, if you're curious and want to see something else, you're going to have to get on a plane and leave. And so I
Or a boat.
or a boat. That's fair. That is a fair comparison. But the other thing too is just that you're right. Most people even now don't necessarily think I want to leave, especially if you want to move international, right? There's still folks who go, well, why do you want to leave the hometown? Why do you want to leave the city? Why do you want to leave whatever the footage of your like zip code is? And I think it's one thing when you hang out with people who are into that, but it's another thing when you realize, oh my God, people really aren't trying to leave where they're at.
Mhm.
And so here's a question I want to ask you because you were very young when you moved to St. Thomas, but I asked this of any young person because it happened to me, but I asked this of any young person who went from one cultural environment to another. Did you and you were really young, but did you feel a cultural shift when you moved to St. Thomas as a kindergartner, as a preschooler? Is there anything that
Yes.
sticks out to you?
Yes, it was different because we at I was, born in Pine Bluff and I lived in Conway,
Mhm.
and, uh, I was
That's
going
Arkansas, y'all, in case you missed it
yes.
the first time.
Yes, Arkansas. So that is my mother was, teaching initially at the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff,
Mhm,
and then I don't remember what she was doing in Conway, but, then moving to St. Thomas, I mean, at the time, the main cultural difference for me was the way people talked, and
mhm,
I never talked like anyone because I talk like the people on TV. I like to say I was raised by a cable box and a VCR.
yeah.
So I have a generic American accent, which I didn't realize was a thing until I heard people on the news, like Lawrence O'Donnell,
Mhm,
change their accent back to what it naturally is,
mhm,
and instead try to fit in with what you're supposed to sound like on the television. So
mm,
that was the biggest cultural difference for me. The things I realized later were that I don't know the demographics of Arkansas or the particular cities that I lived in, but St. Thomas is almost 80% Black, and there
Mhm.
are lots of different people there, both then and now, from various countries throughout the Caribbean and throughout the world. So it
Yeah.
was a much more international place to grow up, and it also centered Blackness
Mm.
in an American way. So it's both an American place to live in the U.S. Virgin Islands, but it's also a Caribbean place to live. So there are differences that U.S. Virgin Islanders specifically
Mhm.
encounter with other Americans and with other people from the Caribbean.
Mm. So let's unpack that. Did you travel? No, no, because yes, this is stuff that I get really, really into. Between 4 and 17, were you traveling back and forth between the US and the Virgin Islands at all? Or was it limited?
Yes, I was. I did travel back to Arkansas a few times because my I I never really know how to describe them, but they are the people who were taking care of me. Essentially, they were my nannies,
Okay.
but I just called them by their names, and we were still we stayed connected until they both passed away
Mm.
in my 20s and 30s. So
Mm.
I was visiting them, they visited us. They came for my high school graduation and my college graduation. So there was that connection. That was a specific connection back to Arkansas. And then my mother is well, she is a retired professor now, but she
Mhm.
taught at HBCU. So
Mhm.
before I was born, she taught at Hampton University. When I was born, she taught at UAPB, and then she spent the rest of her career teaching at the University of Virgin Islands. So
Mm.
she went to nursing conferences and took me along when she could. So that meant that I got to go to different places. Some of them were held in Orlando, Florida, which was fun. And
Disneyland.
yes, so I got to go to
You got to
Disneyland multiple
Disneyland.
times.
Disneyland. You did it. You did it. You made it.
Yes,
Yeah.
there are other places throughout the country that we would still go. I would go meet her after I'd graduated from high school, throughout college and after college. And right before I started business school, she was in Las Vegas, so I visited
Mhm.
her there. So there, I got to travel to various places around the United States with her, and then go on the conference floor and get my plastic bag and fill it up with all the conference stuff, and then
Right.
take it home
Swag.
and be really excited.
And so, and the reason I asked that is just kind of going back to what you said earlier. I mean, and particularly because you've already mentioned you went to Loyola Marymount, so you've got the perspective, of course, of being a college student and living in LA. But even at that age, did you see sort of those nuances as a Black person who was growing up in a predominantly Black environment versus now coming back into the US where you're in all these different spaces where you might be a minority?
Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily I mean, yes, I was I still am part of a marginalized group, but the
Yeah.
thing that struck me the second time I visited Loyola Marymount, I had visited before with my aunt that the summer before senior year, and then I
Hmm.
got invited to visit for a scholarship program, and we were told by the person. I think he was in admissions at the time. Uh, my mother came with me, and he told us that I'd be the only Black person there, and we were like, okay. And I was like, I didn't
Like when he says the only Black person just in the event.
in the specific presidential weekend. So
Okay.
I was like, okay. And I think that he was more concerned than we were, and we're like, yeah, that's fine. But
Right, we'll be okay. Yeah.
I think that he said that because what I then learned as I went to the school, which is it's uncategorically diverse for a predominantly white institution. So
Yeah.
the feeling that I got when I started attending was that possibly 50% of the people there were white, but the other half weren't. And there were
Mm.
a variety of different groups, mostly of Asian and Pacific Islander descent, because they have a direct link to Hawaiian recruitment, as
Mm,
well as Hispanic and Latino descent, because we are obviously in California.
yeah.
And I was like, okay, that makes sense to me. Um, but I think for the other people who weren't me, of various uh, races and ethnicities and backgrounds, it was different for them. And the culture shock that I saw from them was living in Los Angeles and not living in their small town in California or wherever they came from. And they're like, it's Los Angeles. You have to be careful. Don't look at anyone through your car window. And I was like, what?
But how do you drive,
What do you
yo?
what do you think is gonna
Like
happen?
you need to drive, so you need to look out a window. Either the
Yes.
one in front of you or to the side or through the rear view mirror. Anyway.
And since I had grown up in I mean, they were more white spaces in schools than would be because they were private schools on St. Thomas. I didn't have that same sort of I don't know how to deal with people who don't look like me,
Right.
because I grew
Right.
up with surrounded by people who looked like me and by people who didn't. And what I what I found and have had to reflect on of my 4 years at Loyola Marymount was that many of the Black people who came to my university were from Southern California, because that's where most of the general population of LMU comes from. And
Yeah.
it's a segregated place. And
Hmm.
it's both self-segregated, but also because of historical decrees and how things shake out and how resources are allocated. So it
Yeah.
is very possible. And what I didn't realize was that a lot of these people were coming from segregated communities where they didn't really think about the fact that they weren't interacting with other people. And
Hmm.
I think there was something about me that I still can't quite name, that said to the other many of the other Black people, not all of them, but many of them, that I wasn't like them. And
Hmm.
that since I like had an ease of associating with people who weren't Black, and they didn't seem to have that same ease, that I was somehow different, even
Yeah.
though I was like, "I'm here, be my friend, other Black people." They're like,
Right. Mm. I So part of what you're saying resonates with me. I similarly grew up between the ages of 10 and 17 in a predominantly Black country and came back at 17 for college and went to a PWI. And for those of you who are listening and aren't American, PWI is a predominantly white institution. As you can tell from that acronym, essentially that higher ed college or university has a majority white population, and then there are other ethnicities, as opposed to an HBCU, which you mentioned, of course, which are historically Black colleges. And then I guess we should say HSIs, which are Hispanic serving institutions, just to make sure we cover all by the
Mhm.
Department of Ed standards. And so, similarly to you, even though I was in a predominantly Black country, I was in spaces where you navigated with a lot of international, a lot of different backgrounds. And so I think you when you're speaking, I'm thinking about being 17 and 18, and just because I didn't have the same experiences as most Black people who grew up in my case, I went to college in North Carolina, and most of them came from North Carolina, and many of them came up from predominantly Black communities, right? And so I find it really interesting that even when I talk to young people now who are cross cultural kids and third culture kids, this is still something that kind of comes up in terms of I want to be everyone's friend, but someone can sort of still sniff, or at least I'm open. Let me put it this way: you're not gonna be everyone's friend, but you were open, but there's still sort of this, but you're not quite one of us, right? Or you don't have the same shared experiences. And I think that that just reminds how hardcore the racialized history in the US is, to be quite honest. In terms
Yes.
of communities. Yeah.
It was something that I continually reflect on, especially when there was some article that I read about a woman who was living in Washington, D.C., and was from South Africa. And eventually she couldn't take the racism of the United States anymore and went back to South Africa. And
Which
I was
should
like,
tell
what?
you something because we were both alive during the end of apartheid.
Mhm.
So right? Well, and I always say this too. I've told this to Black parents who are raising kids outside the US who are American, for example. I said there's something in the air about being a Black kid raised outside of the US that when you come back in, there's just I don't know. Like I know that I was affirmed in my Blackness, so I never, and I don't know if you felt the same way. And it wasn't until I got older, but I realized when you see all the ads and they're all Black people, and you see all the leadership and it's all Black people, and you're just around a Black community, like all of that has sat in my subconscious that there was never any a period where I thought I wasn't going to go anywhere or I wasn't going to do anything because I was like, I'm seeing Black people do this somewhere else on the planet, so I'm not really concerned about how you feel about the situation. I can do it. And I don't know, did you has that something that as you've gotten older, maybe even realized that there was something about growing up in St. Thomas that might shape how you tend to view the world?
Yes, it's something that I thought about when I was in Los Angeles, but it is incredibly apparent here, li living
Yeah.
in the center of the universe,
Right.
which
Right.
is which
Yeah.
is Toronto for
Yes.
Canada. So
Yeah.
there's a perspective that hit me when my spouse and I, came here, to visit for the first time with our kids, and in the lobby of the Holiday Inn, there was news playing, and I feel like it was from some state. It might have been Florida, but there was news
Oh
about
no.
specific states that I was like, why does anybody care on Canadian news about not national news, but this specific story that happened in this specific place? And then I didn't really think about it that much because we went back to watching Treehouse because I mean they're
Right.
young now, but they were much younger then. And
Yeah.
I was like, "Ooh, Treehouse, children's programming for Canadian children." And then we came back, and so that was in 2017, and then we came back in 2018, and it was it 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 was a whole thought of first initially deciding that we wanted to move to Toronto was that there it had the highest concentration of Black people that we could see in a metropolitan area in Canada. However,
Mm,
all of those because of Canada's history, it's only 150 years old
yeah.
and it has similarities to the United States, but the immigration situation is different in that
Yep.
the population of Black Canadians has it is very much influenced by recent and gradual immigration over those 150 years, whereas the
Right.
people in the United States that are Black, the majority of them are descended
Yep.
from people who have been in the country for hundreds of
Since
years, like
almost the
some
founding. Yep.
yeah, yes, since maybe even 500 years because there isn't research being done about what happened between 1400 and 1700. So
Yeah.
there have just been Black people here for so long, and we have an
Right.
entitlement and a right to our country, and this is what we are doing, and why isn't this being done now? And you know how it. And so the Black people here, since there is a sense of there's less of a sense of we own this and we have to be reminded that we pay taxes, but it's like
Right.
there's a guest mentality, like, we don't want to there isn't the same sense of entitlement, and that is also a Canadian thing overall, and I keep being told that it's due to the British influence on Canada, the politeness and passive aggressiveness and not wanting to rock the boat at all, and so you come here
Right.
and then you're supposed to assimilate to that same thing, but it doesn't help anybody at all, but it really doesn't help when you're a person who still thinks of themselves as an immigrant even though your grandparents are the ones who came here or your great grandparents. And there's also a better awareness that indigenous people still exist in this country, which
Right.
isn't the same mentality that the United States has, but with that awareness There's a specific Baroness von sketch about that. The awareness of the land acknowledgements of the native peoples of Canada. But now, what are we gonna do? And it's like, I don't know.
I wonder.
Like, let's do something. So I'm always feeling like in across the board of stuff,
Yeah,
particularly as I'm a parent of Black children, which I am also part of that organization. I always want to do something. Like there's a lot of pointing out of problems that I feel like we already discussed that on Twitter last year. So now what are we going to do about it? But
do.
there we it's since it's a different history and there is less money here and less organization overall. It's not just a difference between Black communities in the United States and Canada. It is also a difference between mindsets of United States and Canada and resources.
And so, and here's the thing: you were in LA before you came, right? So LA, then you moved directly to Toronto.
Yes.
Or is that, or and what? And everyone's story has its nuance, but that was your kind of your path. What at you've graduated from Marymount, you went on to graduate school in the area, you lived in LA for a very long time. I always ask this question: what's the catalyst that takes you from a space in a community that you'd known for an incredibly amount of long time, right? And decide to go abroad, even though for some people they're like, Canada's just there. I'm like, yeah, but Canada's a completely different country. Like, what made
Mhm.
you basically decide, you know what, y'all, we're leaving LA?
Oh, well, in 2015, I was feeling frustrated. I had outgrown Los Angeles before I realized that it just wasn't working for me anymore. And in 2015, I was reading about Black women who were American who had found other places to live that were better for their growth and for
Mhm.
their well being and lifestyle. So I told my husband, let's look at other places that we could live. And he's like, all right. And so he did all the research and
So you
I
had the vision, but he did the
Mhm.
research.
Yes,
Perfect.
that is a theme of our marriage that didn't start initially, but it it really has developed once we decided to move to Canada. So, because he was doing his job and I was still trying to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing. Because at the time I was focused on admissions counseling and test prep
Mhm,
instruction and helping people get into their ideal colleges and universities and
mhm,
graduate school and helping them with their standardized tests. So
mhm.
I told him to look up Bermuda and the Bahamas since being in the Caribbean is something that I was familiar with. And he found that they both would prefer straight men to immigrate there. And I was like, that doesn't sound like the best for my values. And so then we looked into Hawaii
Wait a
and
minute. You can't just say that and just just roll by. They particularly wanted straight men to
I mean
immigrate to those
they didn't
islands?
say it like that, but they are not LGBTQ friendly. And there was definitely an emphasis on gentlemen and the opportunities that were there. So I'm not speaking for the Bermuda and Bahamas
Right.
uh, Immigration Council, but that is the impression that we inferred. So then
Gotcha.
we moved our search to Hawaii and found that it is the most multicultural state. However, it was more expensive than Los Angeles to live in with fewer job opportunities. So we crossed
Mm,
that out. And then we looked at Canada, and there are a lot of benefits like the educational system and the healthcare system. And so I wanted to figure out where the Black people lived in Canada. And that was a
and that
difficult
was it.
search because they do not identify the same way as Black
R
Americans do and are not like, here we are. And there's only 37 million people in Canada, which
Right.
is less, it's a smaller population than California. So I wanted to make
Right.
sure we were living in a big city so we have more opportunities for everything. So we looked at Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. And at the time, my hair was braided. So I looked for braiding salons, and there are a few in Montreal, and there were many in
Love
Toronto.
this.
So I figured that there's a population to sustain that, and there is. So then we decided, I mean, there is a whole process of uh, figuring out how to get permanent residency so that we could move there. We consulted with a immigration consultant, and since we tried 3 times, we didn't have enough points because I mean, just how it shook out between me and my spouse. Uh, we ended up. I applied to a graduate program. They said no. I applied to another one, and they said yes. So I got accepted to Seneca College in May of 2018, and we decided, okay, we're this is how we're getting there. So we had already been making preparations initially. We hadn't
For a
told
while.
anyone except our mothers, and then we had to make all this happen. So we got rid of almost all of our stuff, and since the children grow, they
Right.
didn't need all their old stuff. But
Right.
most of our stuff was either given away or disposed of. And then we moved to Toronto in July of 2018, and it was difficult up until the end. And that was when I think it was 2 weeks before I then became the leader of our family, even though I'm not the one who makes the big bucks at all. I was the one who said, I'm clearly the one who's most organized and see the vision. So I need all of you to carry out this vision with me
Yeah.
in your way. And everybody got on board. And that's how it's been since then. And in that's the move that we're going to do next month. That's how it's going to be as well. And it's nice. I mean, I did get an MBA, so obviously I have some leadership training,
You
but
have skills.
yes, so it is it's a lot of I've had to do a lot of rethinking from my hair. I did my big chop in 2017 after the presidential election. I said, "I'm done with this." So there's been a lot of rethinking that has gone on to stuff that makes sense, and the one benefit of the pandemic that I like is that other people have been forced to re have been forced to rethink what they thought their path should be and how things work, and realizing that none of that makes sense and we have to figure out something different.
So you mentioned the big chop, and
Mhm.
I think the thing that caught my attention too was that you mentioned the big chop and then also mentioned the 2016 election. And the
Yes.
first thing that went in my mind is they're actually one of the people who were serious about I'm moving to Canada if the last person is elected president. You actually executed it. So um
Yes.
tell me just, you know, especially when it comes to as black people in hair. I'm just curious what kind of led you to cutting your hair out.
Well, I had decided that during my pregnancy, which was in 2014, at the beginning of 2015, that I wasn't going to straighten my hair anymore because I'd seen what was it? Good Hair
Good
by
hair?
Chris
Was
Rock.
that the Chris Rock movie? Yeah, I
Yeah.
saw that.
So I was like, okay. I mean, it was not the masterpiece that I hoped it was going to be, but it did say a lot about chemicals, and I was like, this
Right.
isn't going to be good for me anymore either. So I would
Right.
get my hair straightened so it was easier to put cornrowed extensions in, and
Mm.
and by the time I had my kid, I was still doing the same thing, but without the straightening, still getting braids. And then after the day after the 2016 election, so that was 11/9, was when I told my spouse, we need to move forward on our Canada plan now. And he said, yes, I agree. And then the next 2 years we're figuring out. I mean, it felt so long, but it actually was a year and a half for us to
Mhm.
get to Canada. But because of all the struggle that we had to go through, it was externally and internally. And I had to revisit traumas in hopes to get enough points to become a permanent resident. And then we found a different way, which was great. But it just it felt like I mean, I truly thought that we were on the verge of a nuclear war because the doomsday clock had shifted. So there was so much pressure. And so
Right.
by 2017, I was like, I need to start doing things that make more sense to me. And the things that I was just realizing the things that I had been told weren't working out. I had gone to business school and was told and was essentially promised that you do this and you get this job and you're set. And I never have
Yeah.
gotten an MBA level job despite how great I was. So I was like, maybe I
Yeah.
can do something different with my hair that makes more sense for me instead of just going along with what I was told. So I did a bunch of research, did consultation with my hairstylist, and figured out how to just have my natural hair. And so I was excited when it was finally cut off. And I went to people who specialize in natural hair and have just continued going from there. It has been definitely a process, particularly in the pandemic, since I haven't
Yeah.
gotten it cut since the
Yeah.
pandemic started. The surprising thing is that it hasn't really affected anything. Like, it's not like people are like,
Yeah.
"Oh my gosh, you haven't gotten your
Yeah.
hair trimmed or
Right.
what?" Oh, because I mean, they
Right.
don't see the back of it.
Right.
So it's fine,
Right.
and it's made me a lot happier. I think it's affected everything because I have more sleep time.
Yeah. I have natural hair too, so and I have done the big chop, and I did it maybe probably about 3 years before you did, and then I moved to the Middle East, and then I just kept it like this people can't see this, but like this low, and it was it was the best thing ever. You just get it like buzzed down and then keep it moving, and now that it's pulled back, now that just because I don't want it all in the camera. It is such a personal, psychological, emotional, spiritual thing with like black hair, and that if you don't have it, and especially what you just said about having an MBA, and you went to USC, correct?
Yes, I went to the University of Southern California, and I focused on marketing, entertainment, and entrepreneurship.
And just what we're told about how we present ourselves, especially in different spaces. I completely resonate with what you're saying. For people who aren't listening, you have to understand that, I mean, even now we're seeing natural hair movement, but this has not been the embracing environment or the embracing of this until fairly recently. And, you also mentioned the fact that it took you guys 3 tries to get to Canada, and I do wanna kind of zone in on that, particularly for Americans who may just assume, "Oh, I'm American, Canada's kinda like the US, I can just get there." So can you explain a little bit about overall just what the process looks like, and then some of the challenges that maybe you guys saw trying to do this?
Okay, so initially, there we wanted to get in through the express entry system, which is a point system, and it is confusing to talk about.
Yeah.
And I was just trying to explain it to my family, and just being like, you all need to look it up and see what it is because it's so many different points for so many different things, and we didn't have enough. We didn't have enough points to meet the threshold that also ebbs and flows throughout the year. So the highest the highest requirement is usually in May and June when people are graduating both
Mm,
in the United States and Canada. But
okay.
there's a range. So initially, I didn't have enough points because of my employment history. And then my husband didn't have enough points because of his educational background. So we tried 3 times. We didn't get in the pool at the right time or the numbers keep changing. So
Mhm,
what we decided on doing was I was going to go to school again because I'm the one
mhm,
who's good at school and he's the one who's
mm,
good at making money. So
mhm,
I got into Seneca College in May. I got rejected from McMaster University's one of their
mhm.
graduate programs. I was like, okay, whatever. And I thought I was being, uh, I thought I was a unique, special snowflake, and then went to Seneca College, and almost the majority of my program were almost all of them were international students like me,
Mhm,
mostly from India, but from other countries as well throughout the world. who are taking the program mainly so that you can get a certain amount of work permit. So, I mean, the rules keep changing, but essentially, if you
Right.
take a 2-year program, then you can get a 3-year work permit, which allows you to have more points on the
Points.
express entry system. So that's what we did. I mean, our process before I got into Seneca College involved talking to estranged family members, getting a
Wow.
private investigator, and
Wow.
applying to graduate school multiple times. So it's
Wow.
because we wanted to do it in a way that was legal. So there are lots of people
Right.
here, similarly to in the United States,
Yeah.
who come here and then hope something works out, but we wanted to make sure
Right.
we had
Right.
all our ducks in a row because that's the kind of people we are. We're definitely adventurous, but we are not big risk takers. So we
You're not
followed
idiots. Right.
we
I
don't
got
yeah, we don't wanna be under suspicion of the law, especially in a different country. I don't care if it is
with
Canada.
kids.
There
Yeah.
are jails here. We wanna make sure our children can be
You never
enrolled
see
in
them.
school. Instead of like, "I hope we find a private school that we could just shove them," like, no, that costs
Shove
money
them
and
in
that's
there.
ridiculous. So, we followed all the rules, but it takes a lot of time, it takes
Mhm.
resources, it takes support, and some and there's people who still are who don't really understand that Canada isn't just a big igloo. It's a country. It's big.
Right, and you can't just show up and be like, "It's gonna work out," because you're coming from the country
Well,
below
yeah.
it. Well, and I was also gonna say with your process, I don't know if everyone realized this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I even remember, there's also some nuances, of course, to what province you're looking at,
Yes.
right? So, in terms of if you were looking at, for example, being in Quebec, right? And there's some probably some requirements there, maybe even with the language, of course, speaking French versus looking at Alberta or looking at Saskatchewan or somewhere that is less densely populated. I mean, it's populated,
Yes,
but
we didn't look into those, but
yeah,
there is a language requirement. So
right. No,
we took
right.
tests. We each took a test of English when we were in Los Angeles, and that was a whole process because of we
Hmm.
had to get childcare early in the day for the one test that was being
Yeah,
given that one time, and it's a
right.
lot of stress.
No,
And again, we're going through the process
yeah,
as Americans who are fluent in English. I mean, I know a little French, but
right.
it's not really a huge thing in Toronto. But it's a
Of
huge
course.
process that people who
Yeah,
aren't aware of it need to educate themselves about because the older you get, the less points you get. So if you want to make the move, look into it and make it
right.
now.
Right. I remember seeing it like, and I know someone who's totally benefited from it who was I think she was Nigerian, but she went to college in the US, probably met Mount Holyoke, and then ended up going to graduate school for a variety of reasons in Canada and got residency because she kind of did the school route.
Mhm.
And I don't think you mentioned this, but having going to Seneca, what academic program did you pursue? You already had your first 2 degrees, so what did you add on top of
I went
that?
to the graduate program for social media. So I graduated in 2019 with a graduate certificate, and that process allowed us to roll our kid in school, and for my husband to get his work permit, and then for him to apply through the Ontario provincial program for a residency. And then since at
Mhm.
some point in the year, it was enough for him to apply for express entry, so he applied for both, um, permanent residency programs at the same time, and then we became permanent residents in January of 2020.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! Now we're
So
waiting
so
for, to
it took
yes, it did take, that long, and we are waiting to,
right.
for a year and a half from now to apply for Canadian citizenship.
So finally, it'll be the end of the tunnel, and they can't kick you out because
I
you will
mean,
be citizens.
I have learned that there are people here who are permanent residents and because they don't want to
Yeah,
let go of for whatever their reasons are. But with citizenship, we can vote.
yeah. I mean, same thing, right? On the other side, there are plenty of folks who are U.S. residents who are not citizens. I mean, my mother was a resident for a very long time before she became a citizen, and then one of course, the benefits is voting and actually choosing, or at least the best you can, the leadership that shows up.
Mhm.
And so with that certificate in social media, your background with an MBA, and then at the undergrad level, what did were you in the
I was
arts,
in
or
film
am I
school.
incorrect in that? What you were in film school. So how does this shape your career, right? So you were in, and I'm very intrigued because you came from LA, which is sort of like the film hub, right?
Mhm.
And you've sort of pivoted in a lot of different ways, at least from the stuff that I've gleaned. How's your career sort of navigated all these moves and twists and turns with you?
It has been a lot of pivoting, and it has been a source of like it just it just eye roll emoji. So it's something that I think it's a definitely a trauma in my life not achieving the success that I have with my potential and education and experience. The again, another great thing about the pandemic is learning about people's stories and realizing that I'm not the only
Mhm,
one who failed at becoming the next big filmmaker or the next big media mogul. Although I have my own media thing that I'm doing with my videos and
mhm,
short film that I made last year and 4 books on Amazon. Like that's all great. But it has been a
yeah,
challenge figuring out how to succeed. I felt like such a failure because I didn't. I mean, I graduated in 2010, which was
mhm,
in the middle of the recovering recession that I had entered business school in
mhm,
2008, and then like
mhm,
figuring out exactly what I wanted to do and why. And so now in 2021, hearing other people's stories has helped me feel a lot better, not because they were failures too, but because I realized it
mhm,
wasn't anything that I was
mhm,
doing or anything that I could have done better. It's that these systems for success in entertainment and in media and social media in general are not set up for most people to succeed. It's not set up
mhm,
for anyone who's not rich and straight and white and American and able-bodied. It's set up for those people. So one of the other great things about coming to Canada, even though Toronto isn't the film hub that Los Angeles obviously is, I've joined an
yeah,
organization called BIPOC TV and
yeah,
Film that I didn't even think about being a part
mm,
of because at the time that we moved, I had no idea what either I or my spouse was going to do. And my spouse found a job, and that has been great for him. And now he's in a different position at a different company, but it's still going very well. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. The
yeah,
focus was get to Canada, find a place to live, get food, put our kid in school, and
yeah,
it was just like survive in Canada. And then when I finally had a time to step back and
yeah,
say, oh, let's see if I'm going to go into social media. That didn't work out the way that I thought, but I had already been developing relationships with BIPOC TV and Film, which is the media group for marginalized people of color in Canada. And
mhm,
I didn't think I'm going to get into entertainment again. It was just like, oh, these people know the shows that I'm talking about. Let me talk to them. And
yeah,
now I am still involved with that. I've made various connections and friends through the organization, and they're working with American companies and American organizations, very much spurred off of all the discussion happening in summer of 2020. And though I still haven't figured out my entertainment career, I still love writing
Yeah.
and telling people about it. And I'm also doing my own entrepreneurial thing
Mhm.
with How to Network in Your Pajamas.
Which by the way, is a great title
Yay!
because especially with what's happened the last year, right? You need to be able to how to navigate in your pajamas because you're probably going to be in your house trying to do these
Mhm.
things. And so, tell me how that came about because since you've mentioned the kind of this entrepreneurial shift, have you always had an interest in entrepreneurship or was this almost out of necessity or desire based on
So I have
circumstances?
been doing entrepreneurial stuff since 2006 when I wrote my first book. And in 2007, I
Mhm.
started my company, Mr. J Media, to publish my first book, Steve the Penguin. And then I wrote a sequel to Steve the Penguin and then a third book about applying to college in the US called Last Minute Guide to Apply to College. It's for families and students who are overwhelmed by the application process. And then in 2018, I wrote my fourth book, Love It a Luau. And I'm thinking of writing another
Hmm.
book now, but I'm also really focused on publicity for How to Network in Your Pajamas. So I had gone to business school specifically because I wanted to start an online television network for women, and then went through the entrepreneurship program and found that it was
Wow.
financially unfeasible. And then after getting out of the program
Well,
and doing, I guess, a decade now of research, it's like a, a lot. It's it's the landscape of entrepreneurship and startups and venture capitalism, the concept of the media and profitability and feasibility are not the same. Like there's like Netflix has been
okay.
billions of dollars in debt since its inception, but it's still going and I still watch it. So there wasn't really a correlation
Right.
between those
Right.
things at an individual level. But I also, during, I think it was right after I had my kid, uh, I gave birth to one, adopted one previous to that. So I was like, what am I going to do? I don't know what I really want to do. And I knew that I wanted to be a
Mhm.
coach and help people. And it's something that I actually found in business school like, oh, you can stand on a stage and talk to people and they write stuff down and you get paid for it. So that is what I've been trying to figure out how
Yep.
to do since then, since I have a lot of great advice and stuff that I realized, oh, that is
Yeah.
important. So last year, actually in 2019, I came up with the How to Network in Your Pajamas idea. Didn't really do anything with it. Focused on becoming a TV writer. So I wrote 4 scripts last year and then wrote another one this year. And it was like, I'm going to go hard on figuring out how to get a TV writing job. And then that didn't happen. So, like, okay, I spent a year on that. Why don't I focus on my entrepreneurial endeavor for a while, since that seems like a it seems like there's a lot of churning and I guess chaos, opportunity, yes, in the TV industry, but a lot of unknowns. But the thing that I know that has stayed consistent is that uh, everything's changing in uh, the world of work throughout the globe,
Yes.
particularly in the United States. Millions of women have stopped working because they have to take care of children or siblings or elderly family members, and at some point people go back to work or are trying to look for another job, and there are people like me
Right.
who have had to move or they have chosen to move and they need to meet new people, but you're at home. So I'm an introvert and I know other introverts have issues and are not studying how to talk to people and make your brand nice. So that's what I want to do for other people who are going through a change. Right now, I'm focusing on introverts and immigrants who are going through a change and want to meet new people but don't know how. The reason I focused on immigrants over the past month was because one of my classmates from Seneca told me that you might not be an introvert in your home country, but when you get to another country, you feel introverted because you don't know how to converse with people. You don't know the culture. You don't know what you're doing. So that is what
Yeah.
my whole how to network in your pajamas thing is about. There's an online course. There is a weekly video series on my Instagram profile and that I post to LinkedIn, and hopefully someone's getting help out of it. Mostly the people who comment on the video are are not immigrants, but they are my friends
But
who are
but
excited for me.
and you need those people in the beginning. So to answer that, is anyone listening? So yay for friends who are even doing that. And I was gonna say that is a really good, that's a really good space to be in, because people who are moving all the time, and either they're moving for a partner's job or they move for whatever reason, you are right. I think they can be left out of the conversation in terms of how do you redesign while you're on the road,
Mhm.
right? Or while you're out and about or while you're in a new space. And it's not that easy for everyone, right? Because there's some people who have jobs where it was very much what they were doing in their country, right? Like let's say they could be a doctor. I mean, I'm just pulling extreme, right? But doctors tend to be the highest credentialed amongst us, right? And they were a doctor in their home country, but maybe they moved somewhere where it's going to take forever and a day to be able to practice. And it can be very overwhelming to try and figure out by yourself, what can I do? And especially if you aren't if you aren't extroverted, but I especially love what your classmates said, where I could be extroverted in my home language and home culture, but I don't know these people. So
Yeah.
I'm still trying to figure out I'm, I'm trying to figure out what's going on.
Mhm.
Oh, I love that insight. And I think you've got a great market coming, to be honest. I think you have a great market coming. And other thing, I think some people know this. I'm also a career counselor. So so I'm hearing this and I'm like, "Oh, she's speaking my love
Oh,
language.
okay.
This is my love language." How do you figure out what you're going to be when you grow up, or at least where you are right now?
Yes, those
so
things are
so I
not
yeah.
the necessarily the same. So when I was growing up, I wanted to be a filmmaker, and
Yeah.
over the years,
Yeah.
there are fewer films. Like there's fewer opportunities to make the types of films that
Right.
I grew up watching in the 90s that were mid-range um dramedies with people who are kind of funny and want to make you laugh kind of, but they're not the Fast
Yeah.
and the Furious, and
Yeah.
they're not the tiny film that no one
Fast
sees.
and Furious number 9 or
Number
whatever.
9
Yeah.
coming in
Right.
this summer with the family. Do you watch the films?
I haven't seen a single
Hell,
one.
you need to
Not a
get
one.
into it and be like, what is this? This is crazy.
Not a one. No, let me and because you're a film person, let me tell you. So back in the day, it's back in the day based on what I'm about to say. I worked at Blockbuster, and people would come in and they would ask me, "Hey, have you seen?" I'm really about to date myself. Like I think like The Matrix or The Mummy or whatever would come out, and I'd be no. I'd be like, "No, but would you like to see the small independent French film?" Because that's what I would watch, and people would be like, "No, I want to see The Matrix. Have you seen it?" I'm like, "No." And to this day, I still haven't seen The Matrix, and I don't care. I haven't seen The Mummy either. So I'm not gonna watch Fast and Furious. Although I will watch the Marvel movies because I do enjoy that, but you're right. I don't think we see there's a lot of blockbusters and a lot of really tiny movies, but you're right. I don't think we do see those 90s dramedies. And I'm thinking, I think well, I'm thinking both of like I don't know why Julia Roberts is coming into my
Yes.
head, but a lot of the stuff that she did, but even like black dramedies as well. Like I'm thinking about like The Love Jones and Best Man and My Best, all of those movies. We don't even see a lot of that. So I can imagine the film world has just completely shifted.
Yes, it's a matter of budgets and profitability and the I remember interning at Fox and saying to people who happened to be of Asian descent at the time in this big intern thing
Yeah.
that we were doing, that the population of the United States is growing fastest in the Hispanic and Latino communities, as well as the Asian and Pacific Islander communities. How is your programming, both on TV and film, going to reflect that? And they were looking at me like, it's not. And I'm like, shouldn't you be aware of this as the people running? And yeah, no, there's a huge, it's not just that there it's not just that the economy of film and entertainment in general has changed. There is a huge denial that white supremacy is not what it used to be, and it possibly never was, and that people want to see people who look like them. And the biggest audience in the United States is Hispanic and Latino people going to the movies, yet you can't see them on the screen. And so it's both a
On the
financial thing,
screen.
but it is also a racism and xenophobic thing that is stopping progress, which is like, oh, I don't know how I'm supposed to fix that. So let me just write my book and make my little video with me.
And here's the other thing too, is that white folks don't necessarily just want to see other white
No.
folks on, like, this assumption that we create content is like, okay, white people just want to see other white people. I mean, especially when you look at countries that are very diverse, right? And the increase of multiculturalism and the relationships that people have. Quite frankly, folks will go to movies. I mean, people went to Black
Yeah.
Panther and it was not a predominantly white cast. And I know, I'm using that as an example, but they will watch. I guess another one, if we want to take it out of the I guess the superhero universe, is like Coming to America. Like I know so many white folks who love that movie, and that was a predominantly black cast. So even this just idea of we're going to keep churning out stuff that looks like people, and people are like, but that's not even my like that's not even my reality as who you think I'm catering to, and that's not even the reality of where
Mhm.
I'm living it, right? It is
It is
amazing to me.
it's a function of the people who have traditionally decided uh what to gatekeep. So I totally
Yes.
understand the concept of Hollywood gatekeepers at major studios and streaming services saying, I'm white. I only hang out with other white people in Los Angeles, despite the fact that Los Angeles is almost half Hispanic or Latino. And and since I see myself as the majority of people, not just in America, but on the planet, because of how American society is, of thinking that America is everything, that if I send this off to, let's say, Belarus, they value white people, so we have to put white people in it. However, the uh, the thing that I tell people is 60% of the world's population lives in Asia and is Asian. The next biggest population of country is in Africa, which is 15%. That's 75% of people who are not white, but the people who control what is being seen and the propaganda think like I had to have a conversation with someone who didn't understand. I was trying to tell her that I was writing a story about um, the pros and cons of segregation for Black people in America, and I was asked, uh, "So where do the white people fit in?" And I'm like, they don't because this is not like it like and they weren't even American, but the concept that there are other people who are doing their own things in their country and that may want to see themselves reflected and the stories of other people, like the con the thing one of the many things that blows my mind is the proliferation of b-boy culture in Korea. That's not a white thing. So,
Right. Right.
it's incredibly frustrating understanding what the problem is and why it has gotten so bad, and not really well, one, knowing that it's really hard to get out of that system and get out of that mentality when you're stuck in it, but also not like
Right.
being like, I'm tired. I don't know what to do. I just want to take a nap.
And I take a nap, right? That's me. Well, and here's what I sort of paid attention to during the pandemic, and that is one of the places where I've seen more diverse content has really been through Netflix and Amazon Prime. And I'm thinking there might be a third. I don't know, not necessarily Apple TV, but I remember just having this conversation on Twitter, and we're like, yeah, I can see if I want to see a movie that would actually be targeting an Indian audience in India.
Well, did you see Indian Matchmaking, the show?
No, I did not. No, but I was thinking about, even I was laughing because I'm of West African heritage. Over there was the Nigerian woman who was
Mhm.
marrying a man who was Indian, and we already knew this was a Nolly. We already knew this was going to be a whole train wreck just because both both media concepts, like if you see a Nollywood movie or a Bollywood movie, they're just over the top, and so we knew it was just going to be over the top
Mhm.
together. But the fact that you even see that, but you wouldn't necessarily see that as a major rollout coming to a theater near you. And so, at some point this is going to hit reality, just because people are already, their streaming habits are already showing you a lot of what they're willing to watch. And so, I mean, you can ride if you want to with the predominantly white cast and a certain narrative, but people just be like, I'm gonna stay at
Yes,
home, it's
that
cheaper
that is
anyway.
that is what I sometimes think about.
Or bootlegging off of YouTube,
Yes,
but I'm not gonna get
that is definitely a thing. The thing that
that.
I think about is the YouTube reviewers that I watch every day, and how they talk about the racism that they face in just YouTube YouTube views and YouTube policing their content. But I also think about how I watch Seth Meyers every day, and his he has his digital exclusives, and he recognizes that the whole system has changed. He's hosting a show that was the format was made in the 50s and is gone now, and
Right.
the people that he responds to are YouTube commenters who aren't paying to watch his show, but he's getting paid millions of dollars, and he's taking up the same time as someone who gets paid whatever they get on Patreon and from YouTube views. And
Yeah.
they're both equally quality to me, despite the fact that he has a studio and they have their
Yeah.
living room.
Right. Right. It is. I mean, and there's something also to be said about, I think that the YouTubes and the Vimeos are great. I think what is different than with some of the other platforms is, that's right. You do also get direct content with the audience. Sorry, contact. So you do, for a certain degree, depending on what you're doing, have to deal with trolls. And of course, we know, I think when we look at social media, especially those of us who are non-white, and especially if you're a woman, and if you're a non-white woman,
And
right?
don't look
People
non-traditional,
for
because then someone has something to say.
right, and right. I mean, and it is amazing to me how people will just comment off the cuff, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, first of all, you could have just kept scrolling, but since you decided to stop, right, and have this conversation, or on Twitter, or don't even get, like I said, I have my own personal bouts with with social media, but it is just fascinating to me that we still have to have these conversations with media when we see that people would pay money for content that's just, if nothing else, just to see something different, right? So a story may not necessarily be similar to my life, right? Like you could write a story that I have no experience with, but just because it's something I haven't seen, which is why I think I loved watching foreign films. Like I grew up, love watching foreign films, because they weren't, they weren't the typical American story. They could center on something different that I didn't know about. And I would learn something from it. It just held my attention. And it would seem that if you're trying to make money, if for nothing else, maybe expanding your offerings and the way you see the world and even the
But
system might be better for
you have to
for the
acknowledge that
ideas.
there is value in that. And there is a conversation I had in a
Yes.
Facebook group saying about the hiring of a chief diversity officer on a show. And the person who was the showrunner was very excited about this person who was the chief diversity officer because they used to work for them as assistant. I said in the group that this article is great, but the person who's the chief diversity officer should actually be running the show. And that's the problem, that there is a recognition that something is wrong, but the people who are in charge don't realize that they're the thing that's wrong, that they're not qualified, and they might never have been qualified, but especially in 2021, you're no
Yeah.
longer qualified to decide
Yeah.
what shows get on the air because you have a track record of only putting on shows that you think people like you will like, and not recognizing that the demographics, particularly of the United States, have been changing since the 80s, and you are not keeping up. Therefore, regardless of your recognition of inclusion, you are not qualified to do this. There is a line of people that I could name that are qualified to do your job, but you have the job. So that, like, there's not just
Right.
a we need to include more people thing, or we need to make money thing. We need to get rid of the people who don't recognize that you are not making the most money that you can, and also you are doing a bad job.
Because this statistically, it shows pretty much across industries that if you have diversity, and not just the diversity, but the inclusion and belonging piece is the key thing, right? Because it doesn't matter if you're in the room and you have no power or no voice.
Yes.
You're just window dressing, right? So, as we all know, or at least some of us know, so the Golden Globes are going through it, right? The Hollywood Foreign Press.
Oh, the golden. I mean, they had a reckoning coming because I really just see them as people
I
sipping
mean,
champagne and going to parties and like, oh, there's
even
movies.
I, who am so far removed from the Hollywood Foreign Press, was like, this whole thing about to crash and burn, and oh, it's burn. Oh, they don't have any, but oh, this is ooh. And now I mean, I just read yesterday or 2 days ago, Tom Cruise gave back his Golden Globe, and he's won 3.
Mhm.
Like all these different, it's really funny to me. Like all these different people are just like, NBC said they're not hosting it in 2022. And I'm like, y'all gonna have to put that thing on YouTube or something so that people can troll y'all.
The Globies.
And that's what they're. It's gonna have to be like the Webbies, but which is actually for web stuff. It's just gonna be the Golden Globes on YouTube, because I don't know what channel. Like I don't know what channel wants to roll in 2020. They're gonna roll in 2023. Trust me. But no one wants to be the one that says, yes, the Hollywood Foreign Press has done absolutely enough that we are gonna host it. So they may not have it.
I
But
bet Tom Cruise didn't give back that MTV Movie Award he probably has. Just clutching his little popcorn, just like, yeah, this is my award now.
I mean, I'm thinking of all this. I mean, I have no idea what awards he's won. I know he hasn't won an Academy Award, so I wonder if he would have given that back. I know he's been nominated maybe 1 or 2 times, but he hasn't, whatever.
He
But
has not been as thirsty as Leo or as dedicated to getting that sort of accolade, because Tom knows that he just is going to open a movie. Whereas, I mean, Leo can open a movie, but he's not Tom Cruise.
I mean, Tom Cruise is like filming, what is it, Mission Impossible? Speaking of numbers, like 6, 7, 8. I don't know. He's on whatever, and I'm gonna see it too because I've been watching those. I've watched. I did not watch Fast and Furious, but I have watched and criticized every Mission Impossible. And I remember when the first couple of ones came out when I was in college, and I think John Woo must have directed the second one. And the first one was so complicated. I swear, I dare you to ask anyone who remembers what the first one was about. But then
Emilio Estevez got crushed by an elevator, and then the rest of the movie happened.
Right? And then the second one, I think John Woo was coming off of, it was like Face Off or something. And I was sitting next to a friend in the theater, and he literally goes, he leans over, this man is going to, I guarantee you, a white dove is going to be released somewhere in this movie.
Yes, that's what John Woo does.
Especially in the 90s and the 2000s, right? And I was like, nah, he wouldn't. I was like, oh, look at that. Look at that. But I did like the one that had, he was one of my favorite actors, Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Mm-hmm.
That was
I only saw the first 2.
Oh my God. That, first of all, I just like him as an actor, but I was like, yes, that's probably my favorite one. But it is just crazy to me that you would be called the Hollywood Foreign Press. So Hollywood Foreign, right? And yet you do not have the representation. And so, listening to you and kind of listening to your career, though, what I like is your honesty, but also the fact that you're willing to kind of pivot and say, hey, I've had to redesign, because when you choose, particularly when you choose to be an expat, you're going to have to redesign your life in so many ways, and career is a
Mhm.
big one. And so I would love for you to share real quickly with what you're doing. Where can people find your projects and get connected with you?
Well, you can type my name into Google, Mahlena, Mahlena, and everything about me will pop up because I and one other Mahlena are the only people who have internet presence right now. It's an uncommon name. So the best place to find me is on Instagram. It's called Malena's Guide to Life. That is my Instagram profile handle. And my link in bio is my free guide to how to network in your pajamas. So it's free, it's short, and it'll give you some advice on how to go about networking from home without leaving the comforts of your bed and your weighted blanket. I'm also on LinkedIn and YouTube and Twitter, but Instagram is the place where you can also see my weekly video series called How to Network in Your Pajamas. I'm trying to go with the branding there.
There you go. Put that certificate to use. And before we wind down, there are I like to do this thing called a lightning round. And so there are like 3 questions that I like to ask folks off the top of your head. What comes up? And I say don't think too hard about this. Okay. So first
Okay.
question: if you didn't live in Canada, where would you go?
I would visit Lisbon, Portugal, because I read from multiple people that it is a good place for Black people to visit and live. So I am relearning Portuguese from Duolingo. I learned Portuguese conversational for my trip to Brazil during business school. I went to Sao Paulo and Buenos
Mhm.
Aires. And I haven't been to Portugal. I have been to Spain. So eventually I'd like to visit and see what's happening with the Black people there.
Second question: one piece of advice to survive a Canadian winter.
A parka and boots. That is the most important thing. I mean, obviously, gloves, gaiter. I don't like scarves because they can get caught up in things, but you need to have the good parka. Don't skimp on the parka because it will keep you warm. Don't skimp on the boots. I wear them every day during the winter, and winter is at least 6 months here.
Mhm.
I haven't really worn them because of the pandemic, but once we get out again, I will be. So remember your parka and boots, get them as thick as you can, and the other stuff you can um, gather as you go.
And finally, what has been your favorite experience so far living in Canada?
My favorite experience so far. Oh dear. Hmm.
Or it could be most memorable.
Oh, clearly, I have so many.
Right.
Okay, so I think the thing that is the most significant memory, I should say, when we crossed the Rainbow Bridge to get our permanent residency confirmed by the good people at Niagara Falls. But the real thing was when we went to Ottawa, we took a 6-hour road trip there, stayed in a nice hotel, went to the ice festival, and
Nice.
my family was like, "Yay, we're out at the ice." I'm like, "It's cold. Why are we outside?" And it was warmer in Toronto, but of course, since it's Ottawa, it's colder there. It's
Yeah.
snow. I'm like, "Oh," and I and my family had a good time. They didn't get to go ice skating because it wasn't cold enough.
Right.
Well, I chilled in the hotel and waited for them to come back, and then we had donaires.
You just heard an episode of the Global Chatter podcast, a project by the Black Expat. It's hosted by me, Amanda Bates, and it's edited by Stephanie Fuccio. To learn more about this podcast or to learn more about the Black Expat, visit theblackexpat.com.